So let's say you're watching a basketball game and your favorite team's winning by 1 point. One of their players gets fouled and they go through the free throw line. If they make one of these, they pretty much solidify it. If they make both of them, it's guaranteed they're going to win the game. Now, let's say this player, he's usually 80+% from the field. It's not too bad, but he misses the first one. His teammates slap him up. It's like, hey, come on, you got this. Reinforce that he can make it and seal this game. But for some reason, despite doing this thousands of times, tens of thousands of times in his life, he misses the second one. What just happened here? They go on to lose the game, and now afterwards, his confidence goes down, and his career never really recovered because that's cost him, say, a championship. This is mental toughness. Do you have it? Now, today's episode, we're going to talk about mental toughness and what it really means, because it's becoming more and more popular, especially in the sports world. You're seeing top teams and athletes enlisting sports psychologists to help with mindset so they can execute properly when it matters most during their performances. But I think it's still some misconceptions on what mental toughness actually is. And I also think people don't understand it goes beyond sport. I think the everyday person can benefit from mental toughness or mental skills training. So we're going to talk about all of that in today's episode. Now, the topics and outcomes I want you to get from this episode is learning about the misconceptions. We're going to talk about what mental toughness is and also what it isn't, because having a better understanding of the term will give us insight on how we can go about improving it in our day-to-day lives. Also, how do we measure it? So we're going to talk about a measure that we actually use, and we're also going to talk about a study that me and my colleagues did on mental toughness with collegiate athletes and non-athletes. And we'll talk about how that all is encapsulated during personality and how they measure themselves amongst their peers. We'll also go into the biological aspects of mental toughness, because from the psychological standpoint, getting your mind right and executing and not letting emotional or worry stressors or things of that nature affect you, that's definitely part of it. But what about what's going on internally with your actual body? You know, Mind Body One's all about training mental performance. I see that most people don't really understand the impact that the body can play on the actual mental process, and vice versa, how the mental processes can affect the body. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I mentioned that I noticed there's some misconceptions when it comes to mental toughness. This doesn't mean people don't understand it, but a lot of times it gets associated with one thing or another that may not fully encapsulate what it truly means. So let's go over a few different aspects that I think can be better understood. For example, one of the biggest things I hear is either have it or you don't. I remember I had an actual client that I was working with. Mind you, we work on mental performance, mental toughness, cognitive performance, and all that stuff that goes with it, right? And he actually said, these are things you can't change. You either have it or you don't. Now, that's kind of ironic since he was enlisting my services. So I guess he had some kind of cognitive bias that he can improve his mental toughness and performance, but others couldn't. But whatever the reason he thought this, a lot of people agree with this mindset because they tend to see certain performers or athletes or whatever field they're in, how they execute, and they say all these traits that come with this person. If you notice them, that means that's a mental tough person. And if the other people they're working with or see don't have those same traits, then they're not mentally tough. And this is a misconception. Like I said, we did a study where we looked at personality measures and mental toughness to see what traits go hand in hand. And we'll talk more about that later on. But basically, thinking that you either have it or you don't, it dismisses a person who may need to work on being more mentally tough because they think, hey, if I can't do it now, I'll never be able to do it. And by that mindset, you'll never get better. And if you don't work on it, it's a reciprocating process. You got to work on things to get better. So you can work on mental toughness. This is a skill like anything else. Just like you will work on your running ability, you work on your decision making, your reaction time, your strength, you can work on how mentally tough you are. Now, going hand in hand with the either you got it or you don't mindset is if it's not broke, don't fix it. I've heard psychologists say you don't got to be sick to get better. And I agree with this because if you only work on something when it goes bad, you have a problem. Say, for example, if you have a car, do you wait till the brakes start screeching to change your brake pads? Do you wait till the engine starts making weird noises to decide to get an oil change? This is called preventative maintenance. And you can say the same thing about mental training. If I just wait till I'm going through a hard time, because some people do believe you can improve mental toughness, but they'll do it only when they're having a hard time or struggling. I've had people literally call me a day or two before the game or the performance and say, hey, I need your help. And me not knowing how close they are to this performance, I'm like, sure, what can I do? And we'll go through a whole consult and then I'll find out that's not a lot of time. Yes, you can do some things to get ready, But you need to take the steps beforehand, because just like with most skills, you have to get used to them. You have to adapt to them and get acclimated. Imagine if you try to do a powerlifting meet and you only lift it once or twice leading up to the weeks to the meet, but on the actual day before you said, hey, I'm going to go for a max attempt. Yes, you can test out how much you can lift, but this is not going to give you much to your performance because you didn't really train anything. And the same thing with mental toughness and mental training. You have to build up these skills because they need to be ingrained in your mind. So when you need to use them, they're easily resourceable, just like a toolbox. You need to have them there in case they're needed, but you have to continuously work on them to make these tools better. Now, we live in a very individualistic society, and a lot of people think they got to do things alone. They congratulate working isolated and becoming stronger, better by themselves, which, hey, you can do that, of course. But together, each accomplishes more, right? Team. Like, there's different services. Like, a sports psychologist is literally enlisted so they can help you with techniques that have been proven through research and just with anecdotal evidence with their clients so you can get better. You don't have to do it alone. If you think that this is something I just got to get through by myself, that's one way to look at it. But I want to advise, because if someone can give you more insight, even if it's not a professional, maybe it's another athlete that went through something similar, they can even help you. So don't think that's just me against the world mindset. Granted, in the grand scheme of things, yes, it is you against the world when it comes to the performance, but it doesn't mean you have to do it by yourself. Now, this is probably one of the biggest ones I hear when it comes to being mentally tough, is ignoring emotion. It's not about being stoic to the point where nothing is taken into consideration. I feel stoicism is a fine line. Yes, you shouldn't show every single emotion, but you can't disregard it either. You need to bring attention to what's happening, because once you can know what the stressor or the anxiety or the worry is, you can build upon it because you've identified the problem. A lot of times people think if I just ignore it, it'll go away. It's kind of like a fire. If the house is on fire, you closing your eyes and say, no, it's not on fire, does it mean it's not still burning? Yes, it still is. And it's just like that with your situations that you go through. If you keep ignoring it, it's going to eventually blow up in your face. So make sure you address the emotion, analyze what's happening, how does it make you feel, how is it affecting your performance, then build upon it. And like, it goes back to having help or assistance from a sports psychologist or some type of coach or even a teammate. They can help you get through this and understand that you can handle these emotions and then use them to your advantage. So segueing into this next misconception is thinking that nothing worries mentally tough people or stresses mentally tough people. Just like I previously mentioned, you have these things happening. You're getting stress. You're getting anxiety. It's just a matter of how do you cope with it and adapt. Because if someone has a test to take and they're worrying, oh my gosh, did I study enough? Do I have all the preparations I need? Or am I going to do well? If I don't do well, I'm going to fail. I won't graduate. All these thoughts aren't being managed well, because the person who's mentally tough and can overcome it, they're thinking those thoughts too. It's just that they didn't let it get to the point where it overwhelmed them and took away the cognitive load to actually do said tests. You can apply this to a job interview. You said the wrong things, or even a sport. You made a crucial error, just like missing those free throws, because you're so overwhelmed of what was going to happen. The worry is needed if we talk about something called the inverted U hypothesis. So imagine an upside down U. Now, on one side is low arousal and the other side is high arousal. Now, this means how ready are you for the action? So on the low arousal side, this means that you're not really up for it. You're kind of in your zone to a low degree, and things might be missed because you're really not into it. Now, on the other side of that spectrum, on high arousal, this means you're amped, you're ready, you're wired, where to go, what to do. But this could be detrimental too, because now you're over analyzing things. You can make little mistakes because you missed it because it's so focused on everything, nothing got full attention. You need to find that happy medium. It may not be exactly on the middle, but you need to find out what gets you ready. If it's a worry, that's okay. But if it gets you so worried that you're all the way on this side, you're not going to have a good performance. So find that medium on the inverted U, what gets you ready for action. It may be getting music in the zone. It may be thinking about the game plan, listening to music to calm you down, listening to music to amp you up. But don't think the worries or stressors are going to disappear from the scenario. It's just a matter of how do you allocate it and use it. And this last misconception I'll talk about is they never fail. Everyone fails. When you think about it, people who become successful in whatever regard you might consider, they typically fail way more than people who don't make it to so-called success. This is because they've tried more. There's a saying I heard on this song a while back was, only way to lose is to fail to try. If you don't try, you lost already. Because would you rather have a person with the record of 0-0, they've never lost, but they've never won? Or you have a record of someone who's 6 for 10. That's 60% granted, but they've won 6 times. This is the same thing with life. You got to do things. If I don't apply for that job, granted, I won't know how it feels to get rejected if I don't get it. But what if I did get it and I got a new employment at a place I maybe want to work at? These are things that we don't think about because it's easier to say I didn't try because you don't have to go through the emotional stressors. You don't have to go to the physical effort and just say, hey, it didn't happen, versus I put the work in. I may have not gotten it or executed the way I thought, but I could build upon this so the next time I can get better. So failure should be embraced. It's not saying that you want it to happen, but it's that you know it's a possibility, but it doesn't deter you or scare you, because a mentally tough person realizes all this. They see threats, they see challenges. The more you see threats, the less likely you're going to try. The more you see challenge, the more likely you're going to overcome, because a challenge has an outcome that says, I can succeed still. A threat has an outcome that says there's no point of trying because it's going to end badly. So determine which one's which, and that way you can get better at what you're trying to do. So when it comes to measuring mental toughness, since this is in psychology or behavior science, there's somewhat subjective aspects, but through research and data collections, there's different types of measures that we use that are self-report items that can help us understand someone's mental toughness. Now, one that I personally use is the Sports Mental Toughness Questionnaire. Now, there's numerous ones, but this is the one that I used for my research. Now, there's 3 subfacets of the Sports Mental Toughness Questionnaire. There's confidence, constancy, and control. So let's go over each one. Now, confidence. It's kind of pretty straightforward. What is your belief in your ability? When we talk about mental toughness, they always say undeniable, unshakable belief. So that's what you need, because if you go into a game or an interview or whatever it may be thinking that, I don't know if I can do this, it may not mean that you counted yourself out, but it may seem as if you're not fully sure. Now, being unsure, you can still win and execute, but you're leaving it up to chance. You want to go in with the belief that I can do this. It's because you're prepared. You're ready. You've done all the steps necessary to this point. Anything after this is just you doing what you already know. So having that unshakable confidence and belief in yourself is needed. Now, on the other side, you don't want to have false confidence and just say things because if it sounds good. Oh, I'm the greatest. I'm the best on the team. If there's nothing you've done to this point to back that up, you're just talking. Now, granted, you can kind of fake it till you make it to some degree and get your brain to get on board, but there's a small gap between the actual ability and what you perceive. The bigger that gap is, the less likely you're going to succeed in your performance. So constancy deals with your ability to follow through with goals, being on time with tasks, doing things that's going to replicate behaviors. Just like I talked about with confidence, you have to have the belief in yourself, but you have to do the things that lead up to that belief. Now with constancy, you're making the practices on time. You're doing your best during the practice, because some people just show up, but are they executing? Everything needs to be intentional. With high constancy scores, this shows us that this person is able to follow through what they intend to. If you set a goal, you execute it. If the goal gets shifted, and this will happen. So this is another part of being mentally tough. When goals don't go your way, whatever reason, if this outcome didn't happen or somewhere along the line you had to change it up, you have to be able to follow through or just regroup and start over. This is why being high on constancy is important, because if you need to start over, you're not shaking. Because a lot of times when people have to start over, it's not even that they failed, they just have to begin again. It takes a lot away because you're thinking like, man, I did all this and I got to go back. But that's literally what performance is. Being excellent at what you do requires you have to start over even when things are going well, because you might have missed something or you might need to regroup, and being able to do this with the mindset of that's okay. I'm all right. I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to do it better this time. Equal or better. That's all we want. And that goes back to that confidence. So you can see how these interrelate to each other. Now, the last part of the Sports Mental Toughness Questionnaire is control. So when we talk about control, this is how you handle things when they don't go your way. So you see how these all tie in. Controlling your worry, your anxiety, your stress is important, because things will not go your way. Now, it's not guaranteed that it will always not go your way, but it's also not guaranteed that it will go your way. So understanding if you're starting to get nervous, those butterflies in your stomach, figure out what's something that I can control. For example, if it's in a sport, you can control how much you practice, how efficient your practice goes. But you can't control the weather, the opposing team's behaviors, the referees, the officials, your coach, their coach. You can only control you and the things surrounding directly you. Now, when things that aren't in your control, this doesn't mean you have to just give up and say, hey, I tried, there's nothing I can do. But you can look at it as, okay, let me figure out what extent of this. So if you say something like the weather, if it's raining and you're doing a sport and it's outside, I can't change that. but I can adapt to how I move through the weather. If it's wet on the ground, I don't want to slip, I can move accordingly. Let's go something outside of the sport realm. Let's say you were late for work a few times and there's always rush hour traffic. You can't control the traffic. There's nothing you can do about that. But you can change how early you get up to go into said traffic. If you know you're always 15 minutes late and the boss doesn't like it, what you can control is waking up another 30 to 45 minutes earlier. If you know you have to get ready, cook breakfast, get kids if you have those off to school, take that all into account, because the things in our control is something that we need to consider. Those who score poorly on this subfacet tend to let things that are out of their control get to them and hinder performance. We talk about stress all the time. Usually when stress goes up, so does their worries and anxiety, and usually performance, cognitive load and ability, and other emotional regulation goes down. So if you can control this and handle this in a productive manner, you'll definitely be able to execute to the best of your ability. Now, with our study, we use the Sports Mental Toughness Questionnaire as well as the Hexaco Personality Measure to measure how personality can maybe predict mental toughness. So what we did in our study is we gave these measures to current collegiate athletes, former athletes, and non-athletes at Florida Atlantic University, a school that's Division I here in South Florida. So we gave them the Hexaco Personality Measure, which that stands for honesty and humility, emotionality, extraversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. So this takes upon the 5-factor model, which has all those facets plus the honesty, humility traits. So we looked at the 60-item measure and we wanted to see how do they score on these said traits if they could predict how well they did on the mental toughness measure. So what we saw with the Hexaco measure is that there were 3 particular traits that positively correlated with mental toughness. These traits were emotionality, extraversion, and conscientiousness. So we saw that conscientiousness correlated mostly with constancy. We talked about how people are able to consistently set goals and follow through and change up when they need to. Now with extraversion, we saw this more so with confidence, and then we saw emotionality with control. Now the reason for this, if you look at each one, let's start with emotionality. So people who score low on emotionality is good, because if you score high on emotionality, that means stressors get to you. You're more likely to worry when things don't go your way. You're more likely to be worried about harmful physical things happening to you. And you can see in a sport, definitely how this carries over, because if I'm worried about all these different things, I'm afraid of contact, I'm afraid of losing, I'm afraid of not getting my way, you're not going to do well in a sporting setting. And this correlated with control, because this also looks at how we're able to handle stressors. Now with extraversion, we saw this with confidence. Now extraversion deals with how well do you adapt in social scenarios. Now a lot of times people look at it as, are you the life of the party? Are you outgoing? This is part of it depending on the subfacet, and that's why we looked at the Hexaco, because it has 4 subfacets. So the subfacet we saw the most with extraversion was social boldness and social self-esteem. Now you can see how this is important for confidence on the mental toughness measures, because with social boldness, this means I'm able to speak up in a group and even lead, not necessarily in a boss manner, but take charge. Now, social self-esteem is I'm confident in my abilities in social settings. Now, think about sport. You have to perform in front of people, whether it be the other team, your teammates, the crowd. So you can see how this goes with confidence very well. So someone who scored high in extraversion, and particularly social self-esteem and social boldness, also did well on the confidence measure. Now, as we saw with constancy, this correlated with the Hexaco measure of conscientiousness. This deals with how people are able to organize, plan, follow through with said plans, a little bit of perfectionism. So even though you don't want to be super high on perfectionism, because this tends to be people who worry when things don't go their way, you want to be kind of high, because someone who has decent amount of perfectionism wants to follow through. They want to execute. They're going to be more likely to keep track of their goals and change up when they need to get it right. Now, other parts of consciousness is such as prudence. This is being on time, being able to keep your commitments. Now, if you're an athlete, you have to be able to come to practice in a timely manner, come to practice consistently, giving your effort with practice, be able to take coaching and go along with the game plan. So you can see how these subfacets correlated with the mental toughness measures, because they definitely go hand in hand. So the overall goal was, if we can extrapolate these personality traits and we see how they are able to measure up to their mental toughness, we can use this information in one swoop. Instead of doing 2 different measures, we can find out what type of personality traits are needed to be mental tough. And this is important because let's say if you have athlete A and athlete B, say they're the same age, same speed, same height, same weight, pretty much on paper from a physical standpoint, identical. But if we have a team that's trying to recruit them, let's say for college, Let's say one of the athletes, athlete A, was higher in liveliness and sociability, which is subfacets of extraversion. This means they're more likely to be the life of the party and on the scene. And if you can see, if you're recruiting a college student, especially if it's at a big party school, this could be detrimental, because if you want these athletes to follow through, execute, perform, and be able to transfer that on game day, so let's say they're both mentally tough. Now I can not only see that they're mentally tough, but what kind of traits make them who they are. It's kind of what people do on jobs. When you hire someone, or if you're getting hired, you're usually given some type of personality measure. When you take those tests, strongly agree, that's a personality measure. They want to see how your skills and traits cope with their work environment. So this is the same thing. This is what we look to do on further studies. So that study is out now, and I'll link it in the bio so you can check it out. But what about the actual physical, the biological aspects of how personality affects us? So when you think about being mentally tough, it means staying strong, staying steadfast in your efforts during an actual performance or situation, whether it be a job interview, school, a date, a sport, business, whatever it may be. So when we look at this and someone falls, what usually happens? They get so worried, they start overthinking, their heart rate increases, they get butterflies, they get nervous, like somatic anxiety versus cognitive anxiety. Typically with cognitive anxiety, this is something when it's down the road. If you have weeks or months or further to think about the performance, you typically get cognitive anxiety because you get in your own head. What if this happens? What if I'm not ready when the time comes? With somatic anxiety, that's typically closer to the event or the performance, because this is when you get the sweaty palms, your stomach starts turning, your heart's beating through your chest, and you might start hyperventilating because now you know the imminent threat, danger, however you perceive it, because it may not be that, but that's how you take it. Now, interchangeably, you can't think straight because now your body's acting up. Now, these things are something to consider, because when you talk about mental toughness, I mentioned earlier that these things are going to happen. It's just how you allow them to affect you. Now, does it mean that cognitive anxiety only happens distant from the event or performance? No, you can have worries or thoughts of, what if I mess up during it and this is not good? A mentally tough person acknowledges these, but they're going to go forward. And vice versa, you can get somatic anxiety when it's further away, because now you're just mentally anticipating it and your brain's thinking, is this happening now? We talk about stress a lot. Your perception of the said stressor tends to set off that fight or flight response. This kind of goes into perfectly how the biological aspects of worry can actually affect your mental toughness. Because if I'm going into fight or flight mode, I'm setting off the stress response. Cortisol, this is a hormone we talk about, is made to break down tissue so it can give you energy, turn it to glucose so you can function. Because remember, glucose helps replenish ATP, and ATP provides energy so you can keep going. So if you're breaking down muscle tissue, if you're breaking down immune tissue in the moment, it doesn't affect you too bad because that's acute. Stress response goes off, in a minute or so, you're back down. But nowadays we worry a lot more, and this becomes chronic stress, and now you're making your body weaker and it's not as strong physically and mentally because you're always breaking it down. You can't think clearly, you're lethargic, you're not moving like you used to, you're losing muscle density, you're just not feeling like yourself, and this is going to affect how you acclimate in a performance when it's needed to be strong and mentally tough. Now, if you look at how we talked about confidence, and if I'm feeling lethargic, not myself, I don't want to move, I feel weaker, how confident can I feel in my ability to do something, especially in a sport, but even day-to-day life? And if I feel weaker, out of it, I may not want to move, I might want to do things, I could go into even a depression. These are things that affect us in a way that we can't be as mentally tough, because now our body is literally not in sync with our mind. Now, there's some research that even correlates something called 2D, 4D ratio. That's the difference between your ring finger and your index finger, and how much longer the difference is between the ring finger and the index to dictate if you're mentally tough. Now, there has been studies that shown that people who are higher on mental toughness have a greater ratio, meaning the ring finger is longer in length compared to the index finger. Now, you're probably thinking, what does it have to do with anything? So the correlation basically is saying that prenatal exposure to testosterone increases the length of the ring finger. So you can assume that more testosterone, this is usually linked to more aggressive behavior, more toughness from a physical standpoint. Because you think from an evolutionary psychology standpoint, men typically have 20 to 30 times more testosterone than women, and they were typically looked at as the protectors, providers, the hunters, and the tribes. Now, as we look forward in modern times, it's not saying that women don't have mental toughness, so don't take it as such, but it's saying that people had higher levels of exposure to testosterone in the womb dictated this. So it showed that correlation. So it physically manifested as the 2D, 4D ratio, but the correlation is higher levels of testosterone can be associated with more aggressive more confident behaviors. And this is important when I want to keep going when things don't go my way. If I want to take on a challenge head first, taking the bull by the horns, you can see how this plays a role. So these biological factors aren't the end all be all, but they both go hand in hand. So you got to take them in consideration. So we understand what mental toughness is, how it affects us psychologically, biologically, but how do we improve it? Like I said earlier, it can be trained. It's not either you have it or you don't. So let's take a moment to understand what mentally tough people try to do and they practice or implement day to day so they can grow in their mental toughness. Mentally tough people usually look at solutions, not problems. Now, this doesn't mean they don't acknowledge that things can go wrong, things get messed up. It's that they look for the greater good or they just look for a productive outcome to said scenario. Now, we talk about something like cognitive flexibility. This is the ability to shift your thoughts. And this has also a correlation with problem solving and mental toughness, because if I have flexible thinking, I can say, okay, if this didn't work that way, I can change my school of thought and try another direction. And the more ways I try, the more likeliness I can find a solution. So you can see how this makes sense, because if you practice cognitive flexibility, being able to shift your thinking, taking different routes at an outcome, you can have a better chance of performing to a higher level. It doesn't guarantee it, but if I'm able to see the solution or come up with different solutions, some might not make any sense. Some may not work at all. If I can see a chance for the solution to work, so I can maybe have a chance to overcome it. Mentally tough people welcome failure. How many times have you went out and did something that you knew had a high chance of not succeeding? Typically we don't, because we're wired to be risk adverse, whether it be financially, whether it be emotionally, romantically, physically, whatever it is. We don't want to go to the way that caused pain. We avoid the pain because there's real reasons for that. Because if it goes wrong, it could dramatically affect us in a very negative way. But there's sometimes we have to do it. Like when we talk about adaptation to stress, what happens? You're exposed to the stimulus or stimuli. You get used to it and start becoming resistant to it, and then you have to do it again to grow. This is literally what we have to do with our mental toughness, because even though it's not a physical stressor like lifting weights or running, and it makes our heart get stronger, our muscles get bigger, it's getting our brain wired and used to having a task or a stressor that's not going to always feel good for us. Now, you have to do this in doses, obviously. This doesn't mean take on the greatest challenge. This is where that dopamine response comes in, because if you set the stakes too high, you continuously fall low, your brain's going to get wired to the point where, why are we trying this? This is obviously too much for us. And it's going to subside it, and you're not going to want to do it anymore. But try tasks that have high risk factors within means, and the more likely, even if you don't overcome, you're more likely to become less risk adverse and pain avoidant. Now, when we look at confidence, we saw how this is part of the Sport Mental Toughness Questionnaire. You can see how big a deal this is. But like I mentioned, you can't have false confidence. This is when you just call yourself better than you really are based off no grounds at all. Now, if you want to, like I say, fake it till you make it, it should be within reason. So for example, let's use weightlifting. If you're going for a personal best and your max is 300 pounds right now, your confidence in your head can say, hey, I can lift 350. That might be 50 pounds greater. You may be ready for it. You can give it a try within means physically, but it has to be close. Now, if I said in the same scenario, my max is 300 pounds, I can lift 500. That's not reasonable. And the same thing goes in real life. You can go with dating. If you see someone, okay, I don't know if I want to ask her out because she's in a level of life where I'm not in, doesn't mean you can't try, but make sure it makes sense. You know, you don't want to just go for the kill and you see it's not working. Also, think, have I done the work to give me this confidence? If you're doing something that requires a lot of dedication and practice, say for example, doing YouTube videos, you have to stay consistent. If you think, oh, I'm great because I'm great. No, I wake up every morning, I do the preparation, I plan out my videos, or if you use a sport, I go to practice every day. I give my all, I give my intentional focus to the coach, and I perform. So when the game comes, I know my abilities are there and I just have to act upon them. Mentally tough people also appreciate the monotony. This means they accept the boring, slow, tedious tasks. Do they like it? Maybe not. But they come to appreciate it because they realize these little step-by-step processes lead up to the bigger outcome. A lot of times we see the finish line. We know what we want to do, what we want to accomplish, but that's why it's easy to give up when it doesn't go our way. A mentally tough person understands this is not my favorite thing by far, but I enjoy it because I know at the end of all this, it's going to build me up to where I want to be. And this goes back to that confidence. I did all the steps, the ones I didn't like, the ones I did like, the ones I loathed. but I still did it. And I know this is what it takes to become. And this kind of goes into the next part. Mentally tough people, they find the fun in non-fun things. They can make a game of it. This is like that cognitive flexibility point I made. They're able to shift their thinking. Okay, I gotta go chop some firewood. I know that's an extreme case. Most people aren't living off the land. You can look at it as, I gotta go chop some firewood, or I get a crazy trap shoulder workout for the day. You see how you changed it from, this is an arduous, daunting task that I don't want to do, to, hey, I got something out of this. That flexible thinking helps build up your confidence. It helps build up your appreciation of the monotony and allows you to overcome. And that's what it's all about, right? Now, with all that being said, this shows that delayed gratification is welcome and it's okay, because getting an immediate reward feels good. We get it, I want to do it again. Ooh, I want to do it again. But a lot of times you're not going to get that. And the more you understand that, the better. There's even been studies, like, for example, they did one with a marshmallow, and they would leave a marshmallow for a kid about 6 years old. And they would say, hey, if you take this marshmallow and eat it now, cool. Or if you wait till I come back and haven't ate the marshmallow, you get 2. Now, some kids waited and they're like, I want to get 2. Let's get it. And some people are like, I'm hungry now. Or they just wanted it, so they ate it. So they saw that there was a correlation with academic performance, life satisfaction, and outcomes with the kids who didn't eat the marshmallows versus the one who did. The ones who didn't eat the marshmallow had the higher scores on life satisfaction, academic success, and just overall life outcomes, while the ones who did eat it scored lower. So you can see how being okay with that delayed gratification, because yeah, you can get the good feeling now, but is that going to set you up for the later outcomes that'll be more beneficial in the long run? Probably not. People sometimes say short-term solutions come with long-term problems. So make sure what you're doing makes sense and you're ready to take on the long road. Now, one of the biggest ones I practice and preach to my clientele and even myself is your performance shouldn't be indicative of your scenario, your resources, whatever it may be that's going on in your environment. What this means is, if you're having a great day, that should change dramatically what's going to happen. If you're having a bad day, that should change dramatically what's going to happen. Because at the end of it, your performance, your confidence, your abilities are still there. Now, I said dramatically, meaning there will be influence. The worries, the stresses will get to you. That's not what I'm saying. It's saying that it doesn't dramatically affect you. So going back to the anecdote I used at the beginning of the missed free throws, what happened there? He was in a game-winning situation in a championship game. There was a lot on the line. Now, you could argue if it was an empty gym by himself, he would have made him. True, he probably would have. But you see how that is impactful on the person? You should be able to replicate and consistently give the performance regardless of the scenario or circumstance. Because if you come in and say, man, when things are on the line and pressure, that's when I step up. Granted, having pressure can help you step up. But if you're one of those people who only feed off of that, what do you do when there is no pressure? And some people do underperform when they don't have that same intensity, because now they're dictating the narrative of how they perform on external factors. Remember, I talked about what's in your control and what's not in your control. So when you look at this, you got to understand, if things are in my control, I don't want to give it away, because things won't be in your control. So yeah, things that are already not in control, and the ones you do, you give that away. What do you really have? You're leaving high performance to chance, and mentally tough people do not do this. Mentally tough people are able to take the scenario and say, my resources, my circumstance, I get what they are, but I'm not going to allow them to make me perform better or worse. I'm going to give you what I have. I'm confident in my abilities. It's going to happen regardless. So what are some things you can do to take into consideration and improve your mental toughness directly? Go get some criticism, get some direct feedback. A lot of times we go unchecked and there's no accountability for our actions, so we don't even know where we're falling off. You need some objective outside eyes to see how you're performing. Because you may think internally, because like I said, a lot of people have confidence, but some people have false confidence. It's not always on purpose. It's because they never had someone outside of themselves. That's very subjective, because we hold ourselves in high regards, and that's a good thing. You need that. But sometimes you need someone outside looking in to say, hey, you may want to try this. And your ability to receive that criticism will also show how mentally tough you are, because mentally tough people know when they're wrong, or they can take when they're told they're being wrong. So being able to understand that is very important. Also, learn from others. Go find someone, whether it's in real life or a video, so we can model your game after, whether it be in school, life, sports. Find someone that's doing what you're doing to a higher degree. Find out how they handle performances when it doesn't go their way, when it does go their way. What methods do they take? What do they use? Whether it is a sports psychologist, whether it is their own list of things they go through, because now you can replicate it. Why reinvent the wheel? Keep it simple. You don't want to have to just try different things until you get it right. If there's people already doing it, you don't have to do identical, but take from them. Now, another point I like to go to is look at physical vigor and wellness as a way to be mentally tougher. Now, obviously, the mental side and psychological emotion regulation is important because that allows you to set the foundation. If I go into something with worries and anxiety, it's probably going to bring down my performance. Now, if I go something ready in my head, I'm probably going to have a better chance of performance. But when I talk about the physical vigor and wellness, that means how do you look, how do you feel? If it's a sport performance, if you know you're one of the strongest people on the field or the track or the court or the fastest, you can jump the highest, it's much easier for you to feel good about what you're going to do and stay true, because you're gonna have less people to really put you down. Now, granted, some people are the biggest and strongest and still falter, but this allows you to at least have that better foot in because you at least have it on your side. Going back to that control, if I know I'm one of the best defenders, I don't have to worry as much. You still have to think about it and consider it, but I don't have to worry as much about my physical abilities and what they can do and what they can handle. Also, if you look good, you feel good. I know people say this, and it's not to be aesthetically vain, but when you like how you look, just in general, not even just a sports setting, you probably carry yourself with more of an upright feeling. You feel more good about yourself, because the more we feel good about how we look, we just get that sense of confidence. That's just how human nature is. We're wired for it. As groups, being more physically attractive does play a role. So it's not to say you have to be vain and like only care about looks, but understanding that this all brings together how you feel about yourself, that inner self-esteem, and understanding that, hey, I'm good about myself. Even if on the other side of the spectrum, if you do have the achieved desire of how you look, don't overdo it and beat yourself up. So it goes both ways. So with that being said, before we wrap up, I want you to do 3 things today so you can help with your mental toughness. This is a free consult from me. So self-talk list. We can say hundreds of words per minute in our head, just thinking to ourselves. Now, that could even be thousands in a minute. That could be tens of thousands an hour. You can talk about even hundreds of thousands in a day. That's a lot of thinking. If you think about things that aren't productive, this is definitely not going to help. So what is that inner dialogue saying? So make a self-talk list. I want you to write down 5 either phrases, sentences, or words, or interchange whatever you want to do that reinforce what you're trying to accomplish. It's not necessarily saying I can do anything, nothing can stop me. That can be a part of it, but you don't want to just overly pat yourself on the back. Say things that make sense. For example, I personally use one: you've accomplished so much, but there's more you can do, but just know it's doable. See how it gives me some kind of like reinforcement that I can do it, but it also let me know that there's more that can be done. So I didn't overly beat myself up or overly praise and boost myself up. So phrases or words like that to reinforce. Now, after you make that list, I want you to practice it 5 times when you wake up, 5 times when you go to sleep. So you're reading it over and over 5 times. So that's 2 times a day. So what I want you to do over the coming 4 weeks, if you want to continue the self-talk list, is to increase it by 2 more times. So if you do 5 times this week, next week I want you to do 7, the following week I want you to do 9, and the last week you do 11. So see how you progressively increase this? Just like with fitness, you overload, you get stronger. You gotta get used to this, because what happens is your default mode, you're literally rewiring your brain and your thought process. So the neurons are firing away when things go back to you reverting to that default mode, because that's what happens when we're stressed or we're not as mentally strong as we need to be. That default is reinforcing like, hey, I already knew this. I practiced this, versus just leaving it to chance and whatever comes to your mind is what you're gonna do and think. So this is why self-talk lists are important. Now, the last 2 things will be the same, but one will be physical and one will be mental. Go set out physically on something you haven't done within your means. So if you like to run and you run a mile every day, I want you to do 5 miles. Just one time, go for it. I feel that's within reason. So that's just an example. If it's weight training, if you did your 1 rep max, it's 300 pounds, try to do 15 more within range, like I said. Now on the mental side of that, I want you to do the same thing. Go for something a little more challenging, which you typically do. Step out your comfort zone. Like I like to do this one with karaoke. A lot of people hate karaoke, not because they can't sing, but they're embarrassed and scared to be in front of crowds. Go do that karaoke. Get out of your comfort zone. Do something that requires you to get stronger mentally because you're not used to it. Yeah, you might sound bad, but you tried it. Yeah, people might laugh, could even boo, but you know what happens. You can reinforce yourself and get stronger. All right, guys, so thank you for tuning in, learning about mental toughness. Like I said, this is a very broad topic. There's a lot that can be said. This is not an exhaustive list or ideas, so make sure you look more into it. So thank you for letting me break it down and get your mind right.